Okay, now if you just bear with us, we are going to bring you Jack Omelak. He was born and raised in Nome, Alaska, and he's still there. Let's see if we can bring him up. He represented the U.S. and Native people in high-level international negotiations between the U.S. and Russia regarding polar bear management and policy, and has served as either a founding member and as officer of the Arctic Focus advisory bodies and panels. And welcome, Jack. Can you hear us?
You muted the...
Hello?
Yeah.
Hi, Jack.
I can hear you fine.
Great.
I hope that everybody can hear me as well.
Excellent.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah?
Yes.
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 Okay. Robert, I asked you to turn on the chubby filter on the video. Was that on?
Working. It's working.
Okay, thank you. That's the most important part. First of all, thanks everybody for inviting me to present to this panel. It's been over a year since I've been involved in any sort of presentation, so I'm a little off, a little nervous, very hyper today. I did have some coffee. One of the things I really appreciate is really the opportunity to get back into sort of looking at some of the things that I was really passionate about, and that's sort of understanding things through not just the critical aspect, but the academic aspect as well. As you see, my background was in anthropology. I got started at Haskell Indian Nations University, where I had some great mentors. And I remember getting into anthropology, and one of my mentors talked me out of going to law school. I shouldn't have listened to him because I ended up interpreting and dealing with legal proceedings and stuff like that anyways. But what I'm saying is that these types of understandings about what I'm about to talk about are something, some of the things I was really passionate about and really excited about. I'm a big fan of many of the scholarly, ideas and individuals. Of course, Ernest Tiger Birch was one of my big influences. He's really the one that got me started in anthropology. Franz Boas, Clifford Geertz, Vine Deloria, Dan Wildcat, Benjamin Worth, and of course, Dr. Krupnik. And that's not a baseless gesture. I understand he's not there. One of the reasons why I admire him so much is when I just returned out of school, I went back to my community, and sometimes in these communities, it's very difficult to find somebody you can have a conversation with about these large ideological and philosophical ideas. And I was sort of adrift. I had nobody to talk to. And I just, that was familiar with Alaska issues in the academic sort of framework that I was hoping to address them through. I remember reading one of his books, and I was so inspired by it. We had never met. He had no idea who I was. I called him, and he was gracious enough to speak with me for over an hour on the phone. And after that conversation, I was, I was having difficulty. I had this long list of philosophical questions. And I remember he summed up what I was trying to address in one word. And he made it very simple. He says, Jack, whatever you do, it has to be relevant to the communities. And from that moment up, it was very clear, and I worked with intent and clarity. So I had been doing field work for 4 or 5 years in the region. I remember one of the first things I was taught in undergraduate studies was that anthropologists were discouraged from studying their own people because we could not be objective. And I didn't set out to prove that wrong, but I did attempt to sort of test those ideas during my long field work in the region. what I realized was that almost any project in rural Alaska could become relevant if it provided communities results like cash, political or social prestige, an increase to their economy, or solving one of the unique problems that we face, like keeping diesel fuel out of drinking water. You know, our project, from when it started early on, had none of these qualities. And so, how could I convince the communities that we were hoping to work with that our combined efforts were worthy if we had none of those? So, the other approach was that, you know, we could appear with a badge representing a federal or state agency and demand that the community pay attention to us. So, of course, I tried the easy way out and I asked our federal partners for a badge, but they didn't give me one. So, relevancy. Sure, and this is from a lot of years of field work. I remember one time I was working in a village. There was 11 researchers in the village of 194 people. So you can understand the types of impacts that research can have on these communities. And being from the region, I was afforded a unique perspective. I got to see all of the interactions and the way that the community reacted to 11 researchers showing up. But I was also involved in sort of the reporting and shaping of the project at the time. And many times I'd conduct the interviews, but the report would come out differently and everything was fine and it was sort of glossed over. So with this project here, sure, I could show up and tell the community that our zoo project was relevant and that they should participate, because we'd be advancing the ideologies of mitigating climate change to a larger portion of the global community. But really, how would we be any different than the many other individuals and agencies that have approached the communities in that sort of way? Meaning that they are there to warn them of the dire straits that the people were in, and that we had a process, and we were there to help save, to help the savages, if only they listened to and do what we told them to. Now, I apologize, but that's my wildcat and Vine Delorious. But often that's how sort of the undertones of research and exchanges occurred in the areas I'm familiar with, rural Alaska. So back to this idea of relevancy, that was the issue number one. How do we make this, in order for us to buy the Nanuuq Commission and the people that we were supposed to represent, how do we make it relevant for them? That's the most important part. So, you know, relevancy for Alaska Native communities at times are we don't have a medical clinic, no access to pills, we don't have any drinking water, or we're unable to harvest walrus for the 3rd season in a row. And we show up and ask the community to help us design a zoo exhibit. How do we make that relevant? So that was issue one. But during my time at the Nanuuq Commission, I had the opportunity to build up some local cachet through extended time in the villages. And those people really appreciate seeing people come back. The one thing we identified that crossed all social and political boundaries in each of the communities was that those communities value their children. They value new educational experiences and positive interactions with their children. Second thing is, children are usually free of the political conditioning that comes to adults, especially concerned in resource management. So issue number two, I was influenced by Clifford Gertz. He's got ideas about reductionist tendency, and of course Ernest Tiger Birch, early experiences in Northwest Alaska. And so I was always conscious of the tendencies of professionals to develop less than accurate understandings of the people in order to fit societies neatly within project goals. I mean, we could put together a project that we could take back to our superiors and say that we've successfully completed our tasks, write a project report that illustrates our successes and facilitates future funding. But what would the communities get in return? Usually a publication that gets mailed to the IRA and is never seen again. These are practical questions that rarely seem to be addressed. If they're addressed, often solutions are provided. So how do we sort of not just identify but address that issue? How do we make it so something useful and tangible comes out of our work? So for me, it was pretty simple because we often hear that indigenous peoples require or demand a seat at the table. But what sometimes is forgotten is we do have those opportunities. Those opportunities do exist. But too often we're unable to participate and influence those processes effectively. We wanted to bring the message of co-management and self-determination because we wanted to build foundations of ability instead of apathy. Very key point there. And one of the other methods we used for our approach really addressed two issues. Is that if you remember, I understand that if you see how agencies or individuals or groups, when they travel out to the communities, sometimes the entire community gets together and they're almost expected to put on the song and dance for the visitors. Potluck is held, community dance, etc. We wanted to do it a little different. We wanted to show up with a song and dance. I thought that was absolutely key. And so, how did we do that? Well, we spent time in the classes educating the kids through the zoo's educational programs. So we provided the entertainment. That was an absolute critical piece of the project as well. So the title of my presentation is Cognitive Imperialism and the Organic Approach. And when I say that I enjoy getting back into some of the things that really inspired me, this is really what I'm talking about. Because you rarely get to have these types of conversations with normal people. And so cognitive imperialism is something that I really was into during my graduate studies, and the concept of reflexivity. And that's really about the processes that occur during social interaction and exchanges. The way humans respond and contribute to these social exchanges between individuals, groups, etc. And what happens is they take place in a part of our brain called what's been termed habits. And we make sense of what's going on around us, or make context of what's going on around us by understanding what we're seeing and hearing, and then applying it to experiences that we've had in order to understand the context in which we're operating. And a lot of that is what's called the superior worth hypothesis. But essentially it's about people trying to create a framework of understanding during the exchange. And one of the things I found is that quite often when researchers present their project or objectives to groups or individuals, they essentially create a defined sphere of exchange. And if you read, one of the things I really liked was Tiger Birch. It was something he had wrote, I think, in 1964, and it was called The Making of an Oral Historian. But essentially he was out of graduate school and so smart And he would talk to all of these people, and they would give responses that didn't have anything to do with his thesis, so he wasn't paying attention. And at the end of the article, it turns out at the end he realized how much information he had missed because he was defining the scope of the exchange. So he was basically telling people what to think and what to say. And that's something that we didn't want because I had, for many years, I had worked in the region and I had gotten back what I call auto-generated responses. If I introduced the word, back then it was called global warming, now it's called climate change, but I became so political at one time, I started to call it emerging climatological patterns. And so, but when we talk about the issue, we would get responses like, well, what are you guys doing along the equator, South America, because the ozone layer is depleted and the rain droplets aren't reaching the proper size in order to deflect future harmful rays from the sun. And so what that taught me was that we wanted to avoid that. We didn't want to hear about what people had already heard or learned from television about climate change or global warming. Instead, we wanted to experience what they experienced through sort of their understanding. So we wanted to avoid that. That was issue 3. And issue 4 was this idea of the organic approach, and that's tied with this cognitive imperialism. So we didn't want people to sort of regurgitate what we had already heard, already known, already read in technical reports. And so when we brought the items from the zoo, yeah, we didn't want, we wanted people to arrive at this organic approach. We didn't want to come in and say, we're here for conservation, here's how conservation works. We presented them with how conservation worked in areas like Africa, and we wanted the people to arrive at their own sort of aha moment. And then we would get back things like, well, you know, we do it this way here with polar bears in our backyard. Or we do something similar to that, but here's how we do it. And so that was our idea of the organic approach. We didn't want to hijack people's thoughts. And that's why we showed up with sort of these video cameras, a very loose outline of what we wanted to accomplish, and let the kids run with it. And the whales video is a great example, one of the best videos I've seen. And our content and structure for that was very loose. And so it always got me to think about, I'll never underestimate the ingenuity and the intelligence of a child. And too often it's our limitations that sort of cap that productivity and that vision and foresight. So I know I just have a few minutes. One of the things I want to add is you can see how sort of detailed and technical this a project like this could be. You could imagine what it was like during the international negotiations over polar bear management. A lot of work, a lot of sleepless nights, but before I leave, I do want to say a few things. One of the biggest issues after we've identified all of these is how do you find somebody that's willing to work with it, somebody who seems at times a madman. And we were very fortunate again to be made contact with Dr. Cicero. And we were very fortunate that him and I worked very well together. So you know, one of the things, you'd have to eyeball somebody, and I knew that he was very passionate about sort of identifying these inequalities but wanting to address them. And one of the things I learned very early on from my mentors at Haskell was that one of the first things you have to look at in somebody is, what are their intentions? Are their intentions to serve the greater good of the people, or are their intentions merely out for themselves? And it was very soon that I realized that Adrian was very sincere about his work. And I knew from then on we could form a partnership. So thanks to Adrian for not just putting this together, but the willingness to sort of step out and approach something a little different. Also, Ms. Lisa, do not underestimate her cunning and tact. She was absolutely great. As one of very few people who could take over the lead and have to interact with both Adrian and I, but all the time doing it with a smile. Also, since our work has sort of ended at the Nanuuq Commission, Kelly has really taken sort of some of our ideas and groomed them, and she is very, very capable, and she is going to be very ready for her graduate studies. And so it wasn't without, a group effort in this project. And I know I'm close to time here, and that's my presentation. I appreciate the time to address it.